if it's a polka mass and there's Polish writing on the wall, it must be St. Stanislaus. That's an easy one, but not all churches are so easily read. They come in all shapes and sizes, very different monuments to the very same idea. Look closely and you might discover a kind of time capsule, a collection of all kinds of things put into a single container. So come exploring with an architectural historian, with a man who knows the secrets of the hidden chambers, and with another whose quest takes him to dizzying heights, and with Virginia Raguin, who sees history written in stained glass windows and in the buildings that frame them.
So if you really want to find out what people thought about themselves and what they thought about their purpose in life, you go to places that they created for themselves, which are the churches.
And Xavier at the very apex of the windows.
St. Louis Chronicles Churches and Synagogues is supported in part by the Elberthar and Gladys Flora Grant Charitable Trust.
Do you all, now that you see it clear, do you think we have enough space, enough land?
Or we have plenty of land?
Yeah. Well, we say that now, but
Yeah.
We'll use every inch of it.
Right.
St. Louis's Central Reformed congregation is at the very beginning of a long, important process. They're building a home. It's a process in which they must fit their wide-ranging abstract ideas into a limited space and a limited budget. CRC's rabbi is Susan Talvey.
Right.
Fountains or something.
Harold Roth is the architect.
Do you feel differently about how we might use the garden spaces, or how the congregation and how you might take advantage of them?
I've been thinking about that a lot, and how in every area where we would find ourselves gathering, worshiping, learning, I would love to be able to go outside. You know, I'm thinking about that now in the spaces where we're in, where it's so difficult to get outside, that if we could just carry our chairs outside, you know.
Many of their ideas will be incorporated into the final design, and their building will be a record of those ideas as long as it stands, and as long as there are those who find old synagogues and churches worth looking at and worth listening to. Carl Zimmerman is one of those people. He's a computer systems analyst, but around area churches, they know him as the bell guy.
To get into the tower at Christ Church Cathedral, you climb a very narrow spiral stair in the turret at the northwest corner of the tower. Once you get up into the tower, what you find is some really large ropes, because these are really big bells. Well, we've got a riveted iron frame here. It was put in 1912 when the tower was built. The cathedral had already been standing here for 40 years when they decided to add the tower. These bells were put in at the time the tower was built. They're modeled on 3 that were in the German pavilion at the 1904 World's Fair, made of cast steel from the Bochum Steelworks in Germany. The base bell here is the largest bell in the state of Missouri, although maybe not the heaviest, since bronze is more dense than steel. The cast iron clapper for this bell is a real monster, weighs several hundred pounds. It's got a striker knob on both sides to concentrate the impact. Great big heavy flight here, just to add some weight to it. Pretty ponderous. Let's see what it sounds like. Oh, that's a grand sound. And up here in the top of the frame are the 2 smaller bells, just like the big one, except for their size. So it's nice and secure once you get here, although the getting here is a little bit scary. What you see here is the headstocks, the 2 smaller bells up in the top of the frame. The weight of the bells is carried on this little roller, which rolls on this curved base. There's no bearings at all. The security strap over the top keeps it from jumping out. These great big gear teeth behind keep it from sliding sideways, but it doesn't take any lubrication at all. It just rolls back and forth like this. Pretty neat. If you're going to go climbing around on bell frames like this, either you better not have acrophobia or you better have it well under control. Things like this are not for the faint of heart.
The stories and the histories can be found in every nook and cranny. Architectural historian Mimi Steritz looks not just at how a church was built, but why.
St. Francis de Sales is one of the great treasure houses and legacies of St. Louis's German heritage. The Gothic revival, art, and architecture of the building transports us to Europe and recalls some of the great medieval German cathedrals there. As we look at St. Francis de Sales towards the ceiling, we can see the height of the side aisles where I'm standing here is nearly equal to the arch and height of the center nave space, and is the one of the chief identifying characteristics of the plan. The building history of St. Francis de Sales is an excellent example of the loyalty that St. Louis Germans had to German-trained architects. The profuse Gothic revival decoration throughout the church is a wonderful expression of the alliance of all of the arts: painting, sculpture, stained glass, and the architectural form of the building itself. The stained glass themes are especially interesting for windows that connect the parish to their German heritage. There are images of St. Henry, an early 11th century emperor of Germany, who was well known for his tremendous church building program. It's interesting that a number of the windows illustrate saints who share the same name as the donors whose names appear at the bottom of the glass. For example, in one of the windows that illustrate St. Henry or King Henry II and St. Rose of Lima, we see the names below of Henry and Rosa Griesedick. Their brewery was located just a few blocks away from the church. The strong German character of the building reminds us of the close alliance between nationality and religion in the 19th and early 20th century.
Perhaps the most impressive array of religious buildings in St. Louis is in the central West End along Kings Highway, a place called Holy Corners. Central Reformed Congregation is building just down the street.
The possibility of building in that grand tradition is completely out of the question. No one can afford it anymore.
Those other buildings that you talked about, they designed sanctuaries that were empty during the week and were only used on Sundays. And we want to design a space that we can use all the time.
It's wonderful to build these grand, beautiful spaces as a monument to God and one's faith. And it isn't that it's no longer valid. It's just that the needs are more diffuse, and we can no longer put all of our eggs in this one basket.
There have been some magnificent spaces created in St. Louis in praise of God. They are structures unlike any other, needing special materials, engineering, ornamentation, lighting, heating, and an incredibly complex machine that is capable of filling it with music. The keyboard is the control center for unseen contraptions and thousands of pipes that take up hidden spaces the size of houses. It is a machine, it is a work of art, and each organ has its own personality. And it's Marlon Mackley's job to get to know them.
I'm here this morning to do some work on a 1952 Moeller pipe organ built for Grace Methodist Church. It has 54 sets of pipes in it, making it one of the larger organs in the St. Louis metropolitan area. And we are just now beginning to do the releathering of the various bellows in the organ. And it does have a 40 to 50 year life expectancy, as long as the replacement of that is planned for again in about 50 years from now. The organ can be kept in here indefinitely. And there's nothing wrong with rebuilding an organ every 40, 50, 60 years. The Europeans do it on those ancient instruments that Bach played, Mozart, and all those wonderful machines are just basically rebuilt every so often. They're just used to doing it. It's part of the process of having an organ, really. This is a large instrument. It has 54 ranks or sets of pipes. A rank or a set of pipes is usually 61 pipes making the same kind of sound, one pipe for each key of the keyboard. There probably are only a handful of other instruments in town of this size or larger, and some of these ladders go up about 30 feet, in some cases 3 stories, to get to the tops of the tallest components. This is certainly a monument to the organist's art, definitely, and well worth paying good attention to. This is definitely more instrument than you need just for Sunday morning at church. You're looking at the largest pipe in the organ. It's low C on the pedals. It speaks 16 cycles per second. It's called a contraviolone, 32 feet. Weighs 840 pounds, is 4 feet in circumference, and is the only one like it in this section of the country. It's especially unique because most pipes this size are made out of wood, not metal, as you can see. These will run way up into the high frequency range. Normally you're not allowed to touch organ pipes, so they've included a replica to be handled. This is about the size of a pencil, although the actual functional length is only a ½ inch long. And they've included an interesting hand-lettered sign.
The Roman Catholic Church of St. Stanislous Kostka on the near northwest side of downtown St. Louis is typical of 19th century churches that were built with bells in mind. The bells were used as a signal to the parishioners who lived in the neighborhood of events going on in the life of the church, primarily services, but also funerals and perhaps some other events.
Carl Zimmerman can tell a lot about a church's bells just by listening, but that only makes him want to see them even more, and he's been dying to get up into the tower of St. Stanislaus.
Here at St. Stanislaus there are 2 towers for architectural reasons, but only one of them has a bell. That's a good bronze sounding bell. Let's find out what the pitch is on that. That's a B natural. That's a bell of about 700 pounds. Now let's find out what the other rope is. This is a swinger as well. Oh, that's a much lighter bell. That's up a minor third, I think. Let's verify that. Right, that's a D natural. That's about a 500-pound bell. Well, let's go up and see if we can get to look at those. We're very fortunate in this tower to have such good windows providing us illumination going up these ladders. A lot of the old towers don't have windows, or they're so badly located that you're really in the dark. Not much fun exploring an old tower in the dark. I've just passed the access to the annex, and at this point, it changes from a stairway to a ship's ladder, which is a rather steep form of stairway. And also we can see at this point that the brickwork changes from the square tower to the octagonal to form a base for the octagonal belfry. Well, we're getting close to the belfry here. I can see the ropes going through the belfry floor. Uh-oh, there's a problem. The rope for the smallest bell is frayed where it goes through the belfry floor. When we get up to the top, we'll have to take a look and find out just what causes that. Let's see what we got. Aha! And there are the two bells, one per rope. Looks like products of the first Stucksteady foundry. Let's see what the maker's mark says. There it is. Cast by J.G. Stucksteady and Brother, St. Louis, Missouri, 1882. Aha! That explains why these bells are a little bit smaller than what you would expect to see in a tower this size. They must have been made for the first church and moved into this one when it was built in the 1890s. Here's the cause of the problem that we saw down below with that raveled rope. Somewhere in the past, somebody has pulled this little bell so hard that it has turned over, and the rope, instead of rising directly out of the hole over the wheel, now goes over the crossbeam and underneath the wheel. It's rubbed a marvelous groove in here that's just as smooth as can be, but what it really should be doing is what the big bell does. The rope falls directly off the wheel, and in fact there it's helped by a nice little pulley that guides it. There we go. Well, this has certainly been an interesting tower to explore. Although bells from the first of the two Stucksteady foundries are fairly common, every tower is different. Every one is interesting. If you're in the neighborhood sometime when the high mass is about to take place, listen for the sound of these bells. They're over 100 years old. They sound just as good as the day they came out of the bell foundry.
We have been thinking of these spaces as totally flexible, which is kind of stage one, that we make that decision that where services are held, there are no fixed permanent seats. That means that the space is totally flexible and used for other things during
There are so many things that have to be considered. Central Reformed Congregation wants its members sitting so they can see each other during services and maybe see the garden too. Then there are facilities for children and teenagers that have to be considered.
Maybe we could talk a little bit more about perhaps the walls and how they could be used to accommodate kids' participation.
These are not new issues, not new at all. In fact, a Methodist congregation took up the very same concerns, seating arrangements, Sunday school, and contact with nature more than 100 years ago, and they came up with very different solutions.
Scruggs CME Church was constructed in 1884-1885 and is a wonderful example of church design for a couple of reasons. It features two very important plan types, the Akron Plan Sunday School and the Auditorium Plan Sanctuary. The way the room is arranged, it is called an auditorium plan, and it was a very popular plan type with 19th century American churches, which focused on preaching rather than liturgy or ritual. Therefore, hearing and seeing the preacher was the primary objective of the architect, to arrange a space where the preacher was very visible and very audible. The arrangement of the pews, angled slightly and a slightly sloping floor, as in theater design, which was the model for the architectural church plans that followed. And vertical sliding doors, which you see behind me, was often a feature in these churches, so that the Sunday school department, the assembly space of the Sunday school department, could be used as auxiliary seating for the auditorium. This is an excellent vantage point to see the layout of the classrooms that ring around the central assembly room of the Sunday school department here. This type of plan has a specific name. It's called the Akron Plan. It was named after a church, the First Methodist Church in Akron, Ohio, who first constructed this design for a Sunday school in the late 1860s. The Sunday schools became very professional. They were supervised by a superintendent who, in fact, rivaled the pastor of the churches in importance. Mr. Scruggs, whose name is memorialized in the name of this church, was the superintendent of this Sunday school. Scruggs, you may remember, was one of the founding partners of an old department store in downtown St. Louis, Scruggs, Vandervoort, and Barney. In fact, Mr. Barney and Mr. Vandervoort also gave money to the building fund of this church. One of the outstanding features of Scruggs Church is the beautiful program of stained glass windows, which is quite unusual. It's the largest display of a strictly floral pattern that I know of in the city. Flowers were quite a fashion statement, painted not just on glass but on china and in textiles at the time. One does find in Scruggs a touch or two of a Christian symbol of a cross here and there, but it's more or less lost in this great display of garden flowers. One last thing I want you to notice is the portrait painted on glass of Richard M. Scruggs, who is immortalized in the stained glass as the primary benefactor of the church. It was installed after this glass was placed in the church when it was completed.
These are, from my point of view, some real treasures that you have here in St. Louis.
Virginia Raguin is in Christ Church Cathedral downtown training census takers, people who are going to carry out the St. Louis part of a national census of stained glass windows, recording styles and locations. They are works of art, but they don't really stand alone like paintings in a gallery. But that's one of the things that makes churches so interesting.
They have a continuity of decision-making, which is very different from what you find in an art museum. In an art museum, it's a collection of a variety of points of view put together and sort of guided by a curator. A church building will reflect a particular congregation and that congregation's life within the community.
A lot of churches are combinations, even layers of the old and the new. Longtime parishioner Mary Jane Phillips took Mimi Stieritz deep into the history of St. Bridget's.
Now, Mimi, be careful when you come down these steps. This is an old part of the parish. And I don't know if this was when it was the chapel or not. Be careful, we use this for storage. Many years of stuff
wow,
here.
Look at these stone walls and arches too.
And
oh
we
my
have,
gosh.
This is all floor, this is dirt here. Some of the floors, I think one floor somewhere has been
Oh my
covered.
goodness, look down here where the arch is.
Yeah.
Oh, I never expect to see this. Oh, these are huge walls, thick. They run the length of the church, don't they?
Yes,
Now let's see, which way is east?
East is here.
Is that way.
east.
So that's where the
Old
altar
chapel. This
is
probably,
on the top.
We're probably under the chapel that was built in 1853. Now, when my son was an altar boy, about 8 years old, he and his friends said that the altar boys would love to come down and look into this room, which was a common grave filled with bones.
And this was what, in the 1950s?
Well, yeah, late 1950s, early 1960s. But since then, the Catholic cemetery is supposed to have well, naturally they moved the bones out of this room and perhaps there were other common graves.
Yeah, I had read that the some unclaimed burials from an old Catholic cemetery on Franklin Street, that those tombstones and bones were moved here at various times.
Well, it could have been, because we're only 2 blocks north of Franklin.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
All we have ever heard was that our church was built over the cemetery.
Yeah. Anyway, I saw some tombstones as we were walking through. I want to look at those, see if we can read them.
Yeah,
Wow, this one's in German. I guess this burial wasn't just for English Catholics, but for German Catholics as well. Let me throw a little water on here and see what we get. Pretty good. Elizabeth Schierberg, it's in German here, born 1827, died the 10th of May, 1849. My goodness, she was only 22 when she died.
Mimi, here's one you might want to look at.
Well, let me see. What does it say? Is it in English?
Yes, it's in English. It says, in memory of his affection, Anne Dreyer, a native of the parish of, what's it,
something or other. Yeah.
County,
yeah.
Donegal, Ireland.
Oh, Ireland. Oh, so.
Who departed this life April 9th, 1848, age 30. Mimi, I think there's another gravestone you should read down here. It's in English, and I think he was from Ireland.
Oh, wow, let's see if we can make out the name.
Okay.
All right, in memory of William Sheehan. Well, that's an old St. Louis Irish name. From Kerry Patch, let's see where he came from. Parish of Carrow, County Kerry, Ireland. And let's see, he was how old? Age 39, died 1843, I think it says.
You know, there was an old saying the kids used to say that it was nothing to come down in the basement here at St. Bridget and kick over a bone.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. That must have been a thrill, if not a little scary.
Right.
Well, this has been a wonderful tour. I can't believe what we found underneath here. Just a unbelievable secret history of St. Bridget's.
You've only just scratched the top.
And every time we make a decision that's consistent with our needs, we really need to consider how does it limit its use by other people in the community. We need to maintain flexibility not only for the diversity inside, but the diversity of the community as a whole.
Central Reformed congregations' decision to build in the city was their first break with tradition, or at least popular trends. Almost as soon as the city began to grow, churches began to be built further and further away. Today, impressive new religious structures are going up in the county. The Mormons have built a new temple. The Muslims, a new mosque. Back in the city, some of the older buildings have been lost. A few have been adapted for new uses. The Missouri Historical Society moved its library into the old United Hebrew Temple. And many others are being used by new and often smaller congregations. Church history is city history. This church at Union and Enright is the home of the Parrish Temple CME Church. Before that, the Presbyterians, and before that, the Unitarians who built it. Not an unusual story for a lot of city churches. Each congregation brings its own members, beliefs, and style of worship. But the building itself still speaks of its 19th century founders. The Unitarian Church of the Messiah was organized by one of St. Louis's most prominent figures, the Reverend William Greenleaf Eliot, who also led fellow church members in founding Washington University. When this church was built in 1907, it was Reverend Eliot's son, Henry, who donated the bricks from his brick factory. His son was the poet T.S. Eliot.
Most of the windows in this church are much older than the building itself, which was constructed in 1907. The windows came from an 1880 church that the same congregation, a Unitarian congregation, the Church of the Messiah, had constructed some distance east of this building. Part of the interesting background of the church that we're in now was the fact that the architect who designed it, John Lawrence Moran, was a member of the congregation and president of the Board of Trustees. I'm sure it was Moran's decision to remove the old glass from the 1880 Church of the Messiah and install it in the new building that he designed. When you think about it, it really is remarkable that an architect would choose to take a whole program of old glass and work his design around old artifacts. But that's exactly what he did here. The windows, the subject matter of the windows, are particularly interesting. They illustrate a Unitarian moral philosophy. If you start at the very top, you see the inscription, "God is a spirit." And it's a concept that is manifested in the daily activities of the scenes below, which illustrate New Testament parables. The members of the church who are memorialized in these windows, in fact, represent a kind of Unitarian Hall of Fame here. The names that one finds at the bottom of the windows bring to mind many of these individuals who played such important roles in the life of St. Louis. But they also are familiar family names who commemorate younger members of the congregation, such as the 13-year-old young woman who died and is illustrated being carried away to heaven in arms of an angel. There's a wonderful, intimate, warm feeling of space on the interior here at Parrish Temple Church. Everything is human scaled. Nothing, even the open timber ceiling, is so lofty or grand to seem to overwhelm the congregation. The windows, too, are set low to the floor and scaled in such a way that the figures seem to interact with the members of the congregation who are worshiping here.
Like so many areas of churches, bell towers, for example, the Triforium Gallery, that's the college church, is not open to the public, but that's how you get to the bell tower. Well, I see here's the tower clock in its little house to protect it from the dust and the dirt. You wouldn't believe that to look at it, but it does protect it somewhat. This can't be the original because the original would have been driven by a pendulum, and this is driven by a motor. But here's the trip lever that rings the quarter hour, and connected across by this shaft is the motor that drives the hour. The tower of St. Francis Xavier Church, also known as the College Church, was completed in 1915, although the church itself had been completed in 1898. This old iron stairway then would date back to when the tower itself was built. And it's just as sturdy as it was then. A little bit scary if you don't like heights, but good and solid. Here we are at the middle level of the tower. At this point, the wire from the clock downstairs comes up over a pulley and across the floor and up to the clock hammer on the side of the big bell. The motors here have double cams with another pair of hammers to make it sound as if the bell is swinging when it really isn't. It sounds about like this. That's the big bell, 3,000 pounds of it. Let's go up and see it. Here's the very first thing that you see when you get up into the belfry. Incredible old Spanish hung bells. The original clapper on this bell isn't used anymore because the bell doesn't swing. It's struck now by these outside hammers on the opposite side. One from the clock, which you just heard, and two from the tolling motor, which is down on the lower level. If we take a closer look at the bell, we can see here on the waist a panel which describes the history of this particular bell. It was hanging in a monastery in Cadiz, Spain, was destroyed by an artillery bombardment from the French army in 1812, was recast, and they thought it was so important they put the history of the bell in this plaque. Now if you look up a little bit higher, you see the old wooden Spanish headstock that it hangs in. The bell is suspended by straps from the crown. The great big timbers up there act as a counterweight when the bell, if the bell swung in Spanish style, which it doesn't do anymore. No American bell hanger would ever hang bells like this. So those old headstocks must have come from Spain with these bells. The middle bell was cast in 1789 by Zacharias Dittrich. You can see the maker's mark down near the lip of this bell. Up on the waist is a marvelous high relief sculpture of Christ on the cross with 3 mourners below. The old iron clappers are suspended from a crown staple in the top of the bell by leather straps, which are bolted to the top of the clapper staple. Amazing. You've heard of people getting down to work. Sometimes people get up to work to find out how things are put together inside.
You said you wanted to work on the tuning of the 8-foot principle. We'll take a look at that. Want to give me a hand with this grill, Ron?
Sure.
Boy, I'm glad we put this grill in here, make it removable. It's a whole lot easier to service. Got it?
Yeah, got it.
There's some interesting features about this old Austin organ, including the air supply. We'll see that later. This is probably one of the only ones left in the St. Louis area. Used to be several of them. We're going to climb up now and take a look at one of the biggest pipes in the organ, which is laying on its back. It's called 16-foot open diapason. It's made out of wood. The sound comes out of this opening right here, and it speaks upwards. It's a very low note on the organ. Now we need to take care of a pipe that Ron needs to have tuned. Ron, could you play that 8-foot principle for me? Okay. We've just walked through an airlock into the inner workings of this old Austin pipe organ. The air is generated in the basement with a multi-horsepower turbine, comes up through the floor through this damper door, pressurizing the room that we are in. A linkage from a valve inside this damper door is connected to this big bellows here, which will move in and out slightly to respond to the organist's demand for air and regulating the air pressure. Now, all around us are mechanisms that are operated by the organist in various situations. And over our head, all these sections overhead, these mechanisms will be moving when the organist plays. And what we'll do is we'll signal the organist to have him play something for us.
On South Broadway in St. Louis, just south of the Soulard Market, you can see the oldest American-made bell in the city of St. Louis. Cast in 1850 in Cincinnati, Ohio, it was hung in the tower of the first building of St. Peter and St. Paul Roman Catholic Church in 1851. When they put up a new building with a great big belfry and 5 large bells in the 1890s, this was too small to serve. But it was too pretty to get rid of, so they kept it. It was made by George Washington Coffin of the Buckeye Bell Foundry, who cast some of the most beautifully decorated bells of any ever made in the United States. Even though it's not regularly used anymore, it still sounds. Pretty nice sound still. A carillon is a musical instrument of tuned bells hung in a tower and played from a keyboard such as this one. There's a direct mechanical connection between the keys and the clappers of the bell so that you can get musical expression from it. This instrument was developed in Europe in the 1600s, came to this country in the early 20th century. This carillon is the only one in the state of Missouri, and it hangs in the tower of Concordia Seminary. Here's the kind of music that can be played on it.
Not that I want a tower. The last thing I want to go on record of saying I don't want a steeple. I don't want anything that reaches to the heavens to suggest that God is anywhere but where we stand together in this circle.
The people of Central Reformed Congregation will create a house of worship that is uniquely their own, but it will also be a landmark for the whole community. They'll be doing the same thing that others have done and continue to do in very different buildings and in very different ways.
This program was supported in part by the Elberth R. and Gladys Flora Grant Charitable Trust.